The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had not been this full in 300 years. Every seat occupied by representatives from species that had traveled vast distances to witness what would happen. Next, Ambassador Una Park stood at the center of the chamber, where she had received her true name 6 months ago. But everything was different now. She was not a prisoner or a supplicant or a representative of a species marked for destruction. She was something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, a human who had been given every reason to embrace vengeance and had chosen mercy instead. Torvik, the historian, had requested permission to speak before the formal proceedings began, and the council had granted his request in recognition of his role in helping humanity understand what was happening. He slithered to the speaking platform, his scales shifting through colors that suggested deep emotion held carefully in check. 4 million years ago, when the HFY first received their true name, the galaxy made a choice, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. We chose fear over understanding, and we paid a price that echoes through history to this day. He turned to face the assembled representatives, his eyes sweeping across the diverse collection of species that had gathered. Every record we have of the HFY comes from a time after they had already become what we feared, after millions of years of war and persecution had shaped them into beings who trusted nothing and no one beyond their own kind. His gaze settled on Park, standing patient and calm at the center of the chamber. But what were they before that transformation? What might they have become if we had offered friendship instead of fear? He gestured toward humanity's ambassador with something that looked almost like reverence. We have been given a second chance to answer that question, he said. 6 months ago, humanity was attacked without provocation. Their people killed, their homeworld threatened with extinction, and they responded not with violence, but with compassion. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and Torvik waited for them to subside before continuing. They rescued our people alongside their own. They offered aid to the very species that had tried to destroy them, and they asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to prove that they were not what we feared. He bowed toward Park in a gesture of profound respect. I believe they have earned that opportunity. The formal proceedings began after Torvik returned to his seat, with representatives from various species offering their perspectives on what had happened and what should happen next. Some spoke in favor of continued vigilance, arguing that humanity's restraint might be nothing more than a strategy designed to lower the galaxy's defenses. Others spoke of the need for reconciliation, pointing out that humanity had demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and compassion that made them valuable potential partners. Park listened to all of it without visible reaction, her face composed in the diplomatic neutrality she had spent years perfecting. When her turn came to speak, she rose and walked to the platform with measured steps that echoed through the silent chamber. I am not here to convince you that humanity is harmless, she said, her voice clear and strong. We are not harmless, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. She paused, letting the admission settle into the consciousness of her audience. The true name your archivists gave us was accurate. We are survivors. We persist. We endure long past the point where other species might surrender or despair. And yes, that quality can be dangerous. Her eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gazes of beings who had feared her species and beings who had defended them. But I'm here to tell you that dangerous is not the same as evil, and survival is not the same as conquest. She thought of the ancient recordings Torvik had shown her. The HFY, with their unfamiliar forms and their hauntingly familiar eyes. The HFY became what they became because they were given no other path, because every hand extended toward them held a weapon, and every voice that spoke their name spoke it as a curse. Her voice softened, taking on a quality of genuine appeal rather than diplomatic performance. We are asking you to give us a different path. She reached into her uniform and withdrew a small object that glinted in the chamber's light. and a collective intake of breath rippled through the audience as they recognized what she held. It was a fragment of HFY technology, one of the few surviving artifacts from that ancient civilization, given to her by Torvik as a symbol of what might have been. The HFY transcended in the end, she said. They evolved beyond physical form and departed this dimension, leaving behind only ruins and memories, and a name that became synonymous with fear. She held the artifact up for all to see, but I like to believe that somewhere in the vast reaches of existence, they are still out there, still surviving, still persisting. And I like to believe that if they could speak to us now, they would tell us something important. She lowered the artifact and looked directly at the council representatives. They would tell us that the true name is not destiny, that what we become depends on the choices we make and the choices others make about us, and that fear creates the very monsters it seeks to prevent. She placed the artifact on the speaking platform, a gift to the council from the species they had nearly destroyed. Humanity chooses to be partners rather than conquerors. She said, we choose to be builders rather than destroyers, and we choose to offer the galaxy our friendship, even though the galaxy tried to take our future. She stepped back from the platform, her address complete. That is who we are, and that is who we will remain. Not because the true name compels us, but because we have decided it for ourselves. The vote that followed was closer than anyone had expected, but in the end humanity was granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council, the first step on a long journey toward the acceptance they had sought since first reaching the stars and far across time. In a future that Unipark would not live to see, her choice echoed through the ages. Humanity had inherited the galaxy, just as the true name predicted, but not through conquest or destruction. They inherited it by remembering, 10,000 years after that fateful naming ceremony. When other species had risen and fallen and faded into history, humanity remained, and they had become something unexpected. They had become the keepers of memory, the preservers of stories, the species that collected the histories of every civilization that had ever existed and ensured that none of them would ever be truly forgotten. The HFY had transcended and departed, leaving nothing behind, but humanity chose to stay, and in staying, they gave the galaxy something more valuable than fear had ever been. They gave it continuity, they gave it meaning, and they gave it the promise that no matter what happened, someone would always be there to remember what had come before. The true name had been accurate after all. Humanity was indeed those who remain after, but what they remained to do was not destroy or conquer. It was simply to remember, and in remembering, to ensure that nothing was ever truly lost. The inheritors had inherited the stars, and they held them gently, like the precious memories they had become. The three fleets arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system on a Tuesday morning, their combined forces representing more military power than humanity had ever imagined existed in the universe. Admiral Minjin Kang stood on the bridge of humanity's largest warship, a vessel that now seemed pathetically small compared to the armada that faced them. And he read Ambassador Park's message one more time on his personal display. Do not attack first. She had written, and do not respond with overwhelming force even if attacked. Show them that we can choose to be something other than what they fear. It was the most difficult order he had ever received, made worse by the fact that it was not technically an order at all, but merely the recommendation of a diplomat who might already be dead. The unified Earth government had debated for days after receiving her message, with some leaders arguing for immediate surrender and others demanding a preemptive strike that might at least take some of the enemy with them. In the end, they had chosen a middle path that satisfied no one. Defensive posture without aggression. The hope that survival might come through restraint rather than violence. Minjun thought it was probably hopeless, but he had spent his entire career following orders he disagreed with, and he was not about to stop now. The fleets held position at the edge of the system, their weapons powered but not targeting. as if waiting for something. That something arrived 6 hours later in the form of a small transport ship that slipped past the military vessels and broadcast on all frequencies a simple message requesting permission to approach. Earth Ambassador Park was alive, and she was coming home. Minjun watched the transport dock at the orbital station where he had established his command post, and he went personally to meet the woman who had asked humanity to bet its existence on mercy. She looked tired, he thought as she stepped through the airlock, tired and determined and carrying herself with the weight of everything that had happened since she had walked into the Grand Archives expecting a routine ceremony. "Admiral Kang," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion written on her face. "I need to address the fleets. They may not listen," he warned her. "They will listen," she replied with the same certainty he had heard in her message. "The question is whether they will hear." She took position at the communication console and broadcast on every frequency, her words reaching not just the 3 fleets, but every ship and station in the solar system and beyond. "My name is Una Park, and I am the ambassador for humanity," she began. "I know why you have come here, and I know what you believe my species will become if we are allowed to survive." She paused, gathering her thoughts, and Minjun saw her hands trembling slightly before she clenched them into fists. "You call us the inheritors because your archivists saw within us the same quality that defined the Vethkai, the capacity to endure beyond all reason and all opposition. And you fear that we will do what the Vethkai did and outlast every other civilization in the galaxy." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, the trembling fading as conviction took its place. "But I have learned something about the Vethkai that changes everything," she said. "I have learned that no one knows for certain what they actually did, whether they conquered and destroyed or simply survived while others exhausted themselves trying to accomplish the impossible." She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on something beyond the console, something only she could see. "And I have come to believe that the Vethkai became what they became because the galaxy gave them no other choice. Because fear made enemies of species that could have been allies. And because the attempt to prevent a nightmare created the very monster it sought to avoid." Minjun watched the displays showing the alien fleets, looking for any sign of response, but the ships remained motionless and silent. "I am not asking you to trust humanity," Park continued. "Trust must be earned, and we have not yet had the opportunity to earn it. But I am asking you to consider whether this moment might be different than the moment 4 million years ago, when your ancestors first encountered the Vethkai. I am asking you to give us the chance to prove that the true name reflects potential rather than destiny." A communication channel opened from one of the alien vessels, and a voice emerged that sounded young and uncertain. "This is Commander Daehyun of the vessel Meridian," the voice said. "I joined this fleet because my superiors ordered me to. But I have been listening to your words, Ambassador, and I have a question." "Ask it," Park replied. "The records say the Vethkai were terrible, that they destroyed everything that opposed them. But you suggest that perhaps they only became terrible because the galaxy forced them to be," Daehyun said. "If that is true, then are we not doing the same thing right now? Are we not creating the very future we fear by trying to prevent it?" Silence stretched across the void between the fleets, and Minjun held his breath. "Yes," Park said simply. "That is exactly what you are doing." "Then perhaps we should stop," Daehyun said. The communication channel closed, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then the vessel Meridian broke formation and moved away from the attack position, its weapons powering down as it turned toward the edge of the system. Other ships followed. First one, and then a handful, and then dozens. Their commanders making individual decisions to reject the orders they had been given and choose a different path, but not all of. Then Minjun saw the weapons lock warning appear on his display a split second before the First shot was fired. A single strike from a vessel that had not retreated. Its commander choosing fear over hope. The shot hit an orbital station on the far side of the system. A civilian research facility with no military value. And the explosion was visible from Earth's surface as a brief new star in the sky. Humanity had been attacked. And the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what the inheritors would do. Park's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. Calm and clear and absolutely certain. "Launch rescue ships," she said. "All of them. Now." Minjin stared at her for a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Ambassador, we have just been attacked. Our people are dying out there. And you want us to respond with rescue operations. I want us to respond by being human," she said. "I want us to show the galaxy what we choose to be when everything is at stake." He gave the order. Every rescue vessel humanity possessed launch toward the damaged station. Their trajectories taking them directly through the space where the hostile fleet still waited. Completely vulnerable if anyone chose to fire again. No one did. And as the galaxy watched, humanity did something that no one had expected. They saved everyone they could reach. Human and alien alike, pulling survivors from the wreckage without regard for species or allegiance. Broadcasting their rescue operations for all to see. The coalition against humanity did not survive that moment. Fracturing into factions that could not agree on whether to continue the attack or withdraw. And as hours passed and the rescue operations continued, more and more ships turned away from Earth and began the long journey home. Park stood at the center of it all. Exhausted and triumphant and terrified in equal measure. Knowing that they had won a battle, but not yet the war, because somewhere out there the fear still existed. And fear had a way of returning when you least expected it. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Impossible to contain despite every effort at suppression. And within 2 weeks of the naming ceremony, every inhabited world knew that humanity had been branded with the most terrifying designation in galactic history on the border worlds nearest to human space. Entire populations began evacuating to systems farther from Earth. Their fear overriding any rational assessment of the actual threat level on military stations throughout Council territory. Commanders received conflicting orders as different factions argued about how to respond to this revelation. And on a cold station orbiting a gas giant 300 light-years from Earth, a young translator named So-Jin watched the chaos unfold with growing horror. So-Jin was a rarity in the galaxy. One of only a few hundred beings of mixed human and alien heritage. Her mother a human diplomat and her father a Teshan scholar who had fallen in love across the vast gulf between species. She had grown up between two worlds, never fully belonging to either, and she had made her peace with that isolation long ago, but now she found herself in an impossible position, watching her mother's species be condemned for something they had not done and might never do. The guards who watched Ambassador Park's cell had grown careless over the past few days. Convinced that their prisoner posed no immediate threat and distracted by the constant stream of alarming news from across the galaxy, So-Jin used that carelessness to her advantage. Slipping through corridors she had memorized during her years working on this station, and approaching the detention area through a maintenance tunnel that the security systems had long forgotten existed. She found the ambassador sitting on her bed with her eyes closed, not sleeping but clearly deep in thought. As she pressed herself against the wall just outside the range of the surveillance systems, "Ambassador Park," she whispered, and watched the human woman's eyes snap open with an alertness that seemed to confirm everything the galaxy feared about her species. "Who are you?" Yuna asked, rising slowly and moving toward the barrier. "My name is So-Jin, and my mother was human," she replied. "I work as a translator on this station, and I have access to communication systems that the Council does not monitor." Hope flickered across the ambassador's face. Quickly controlled, but not quickly enough to hide. Can you send a message to Earth? I can. But it will be dangerous for both of us if I am discovered, Seojin said. The Marshall Concord has authorized 3 fleets to move toward your home system, and they will arrive within the month. She watched the ambassador absorb this information without any visible sign of panic. Only a tightening around her eyes that suggested deep concern being held firmly in check. I need you to send a warning, Yuna said, her voice low and urgent. But more than that, I need you to send a message about how Earth should respond. What message? Tell them not to fight back. Seojin felt her scale shift in confusion. A reminder of her mixed heritage that she usually tried to suppress. If 3 fleets attack your homeworld and your people do not defend themselves, they will be destroyed. No, Yuna said with a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere hope. If we attack first, they'll respond with overwhelming force. We prove everything the galaxy fears about us. We become the monsters they expect us to be. She stepped closer to the barrier, her eyes intense with conviction. But if we show restraint, if we demonstrate that we can be threatened with extinction and still choose mercy, then we prove that the true name does not have to define us. Seojin considered this for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications. You are asking your entire species to gamble their existence on the hope that the galaxy will change its mind about them. I am asking my species to be better than their fear, Yuna replied. That is what humans have always done when we are at our best. We choose who we want to be, rather than letting our circumstances choose for us. She reached into her uniform and withdrew a small data chip that she must have kept hidden from the guards. During her initial detention, this contains everything I have learned about why the galaxy fears us and what happened to the Vethkai, she said. Send this to Earth along with my message, and let humanity decide for itself how to respond. Seojin took the chip, her fingers brushing against the barrier as she did so, and feeling the slight tingle of the energy field. Why do you trust me? She asked. Genuinely curious. Because you came here, Yuna said simply. Because you could have ignored what was happening and protected yourself. But instead, you chose to help someone your society has decided to hate. She smiled. And Seojin saw in that expression something that matched what the historian Torvik had described in the ancient Vethkai recordings. That is the kind of choice that defines what a species truly is. Yuna continued, not the circumstances of our birth or the names others give us, but the actions we take when everything is at stake. Seojin nodded slowly, understanding forming in her mind like crystals growing in solution. I will send your message, she said, and I will do what I can to help you escape this place before the fleets arrive. Focus on the message first, Yuna said. My survival matters less than making sure Earth understands what is coming and how. I believe we should respond. Seojin slipped away through the maintenance tunnels. The data chip pressed against her chest, and she thought about the choice she had just made. She had sided with humanity against the rest of the galaxy, based on nothing more than a conversation with a single human woman who believed that her species could choose to be something other than what their true name suggested. It was a foolish gamble by any rational measure, but as she made her way to the communication center where she would risk everything to send a message across the stars, Seojin found herself hoping that the ambassador was right, because if humanity could prove that the true name was not destiny, then perhaps she herself could finally stop feeling like she was caught between two worlds and start believing that she could choose her own path forward. The message went out 3 hours later, encoded in a format that would take council cryptographers weeks to break, carrying across the void toward a small blue planet that had no idea it had become the most feared world in galactic history and on Earth. As the message arrived and spread through channels both official and otherwise, Humanity began to understand that the universe they had so eagerly sought to join now wanted nothing more than to see them destroyed. The question that remained was what they would do about it. The holding cell where they confined Ambassador Una Park was comfortable enough, with soft lighting and adequate furniture and food that met human nutritional requirements. But the energy barrier across the doorway and the armed guards beyond it made the reality of her situation perfectly clear. She had been here for 3 days now, separated from her delegation and denied any communication with Earth. And no one would answer her questions about what was happening or why the galaxy had suddenly turned against her species. On the 4th day, someone finally came to see her. He was a Deshan, his serpentine body covered in scales that shifted between blue and green as he moved. And he carried himself with the nervous energy of someone doing something forbidden. "Ambassador Park," he said as he approached the barrier, keeping his voice low despite the fact that they were alone. "My name is Torvik, and I am a historian specializing in the pre-council era. Have you come to explain why I am being treated like a prisoner despite having committed no crime?" Una asked. Rising from her seat and approaching the barrier, "I have come to tell you what no one else will," Torvik replied, his scales flickering with colors that suggested anxiety and determination in equal measure. "Because I believe you deserve to understand why the galaxy fears your people." He produced a small device from somewhere within his robes and activated a holographic display that floated between them, showing images and text in a script that Una could not read 4 million years ago. Long before the current Galactic Council was formed, there existed another great civilization that spanned the stars, Torvik began, his voice taking on the rhythm of someone reciting history they knew by heart. Dozens of species had achieved spaceflight and formed alliances and trade networks and all the other structures of interstellar society. The holographic display shifted to show a planet that looked harsh and unforgiving, its surface scarred by volcanic activity and battered by extreme weather. And then they discovered the Vethkai, the species that shared our true name, Una said, remembering what Kethros had told her before the guards arrived to take her away. "Yes," Torvik confirmed. "The Vethkai evolved on a world that should have been impossible for complex life to develop. A planet of constant catastrophe where survival required adaptation beyond anything the galaxy had seen before." He manipulated the display to show images that made Una's breath catch in her throat. The Vethkai looked nothing like humans, their bodies designed for a world of violence and hardship. But something in their recorded images struck her as deeply familiar in a way she could not immediately explain. When the Vethkai achieved spaceflight and encountered other species, the reaction was much like what you have experienced, Torvik continued. Fear and suspicion and the assumption that such a species must be dangerous. And were they? Una asked. Torvik's scales shifted to a complex pattern that she could not interpret. "That is the question that has haunted galactic historians for millions of years," he said. "The records from that era are incomplete and often contradictory. But what we know is this: every civilization that tried to destroy the Vethkai eventually fell, while the Vethkai themselves continued." The display showed images of ancient wars, fleets of ships and burning worlds, and the wreckage of civilizations that had ceased to exist long before Earth had formed from cosmic dust. Some records suggest the Vethkai were conquerors who crushed all opposition through superior military force, Torvik said. But other records tell a different story. A story of a species that simply wanted to be left alone and defended itself when attacked. What actually happened to them? Una asked, her mind racing with the implications of what she was hearing. "They transcended," Torvik replied. "After millions of years of existence, the Vethkai evolved beyond physical form entirely and departed this dimension of reality. leaving behind only ruins and memories and a name that became synonymous with inevitable doom. He deactivated the holographic display and looked at Yuna with an expression she recognized as troubled uncertainty. The true name given to your species is the same name that was given to the HFY when they were first encountered, he said. The archivists do not choose these names, Ambassador. They simply perceive them. And what they perceived in humanity was the same fundamental essence that defined the HFY, the capacity to survive. Yuna said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. More than that, Torvik said. The inability to be destroyed, the refusal to accept extinction, the quality of persisting beyond all reason and all opposition until everything else has fallen away. He leaned closer to the barrier, his voice dropping even lower. The galaxy does not fear that humanity will attack them, Ambassador. They fear that humanity will still exist long after their own civilizations have crumbled to dust. And that fear has driven entire species to madness in the past. Yuna processed this information in silence for a long moment, her diplomatic training helping her organize her thoughts despite the enormity of what she was learning. What happened to the species that tried to destroy the HFY? She finally asked. Torvik's scales went pale. A color she knew indicated deep distress. They are gone, he said simply. Every single one of them. Erased from existence so completely that we only know they existed at all because of fragments of HFY records that survived the ages. Did the HFY destroy them? We do not know, Torvik admitted. Some historians believe the HFY annihilated them in retaliation for attempted genocide. But others believe those civilizations simply exhausted themselves trying to accomplish the impossible. That they poured so many resources into destroying an enemy that could not be destroyed that they had nothing left when other threats emerged. He paused. And when he spoke again, his voice carried something that sounded almost like hope. I am telling you this because I believe the galaxy is making the same mistake it made 4 million years ago, he said. I believe the true name reflects potential, not destiny. And I believe that humanity has the capacity to be something different than what the HFY became. What do you expect me to do with this information? Yuna asked. I expect you to survive, Torvik said. Because that is what your species does, and because somewhere out there are fleets being assembled to ensure that humanity never has the chance to inherit the galaxy. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her one final time. I looked at the ancient recordings of the HFY for many years before I ever encountered a human, he said. And when I finally met your species, I saw something in your eyes that I recognized from those ancient images. The look of beings who simply do not know how to stop. He slithered away before Yuna could respond, leaving her alone with the weight of 4 million years of history and the knowledge that somewhere, beyond the stars that had always seemed so welcoming, forces were gathering to destroy her people before they had the chance to become what the galaxy feared. She sat down slowly on the edge of her bed and stared at the energy barrier that kept her imprisoned. And she made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. She would find a way to warn Earth. And humanity would survive this because that was what humans did. And no force in the galaxy had ever succeeded in teaching them otherwise. Ambassador Yuna Park had never seen so many alien species gathered in one place before this moment. And the sight of them made her heart race with excitement rather than fear. The grand archives of the Galactic Council stretched before her like a cathedral made of living crystal, its walls pulsing with soft light that shifted through colors she had no names for. And every step she took echoed through halls that had witnessed the naming of 12,000 civilizations across 4 million years of galactic history. She walked with her delegation of 6 humans behind her, their formal uniforms crisp and their faces carefully neutral, though she knew they felt the same mixture of wonder and nervousness that churned in her own stomach. Today, humanity would receive its true name. The archivists had explained the ceremony to her in careful detail during the preparation meetings, and she understood that this was considered the most sacred tradition in all of Council space. Every species that joined the galactic community underwent the naming, a ritual where the archivists would peer into the collective soul of an entire civilization and speak aloud the word that captured its fundamental essence. Most species received names like builders or seekers or harmonists, pleasant designations that reflected their cultural values and their contributions to galactic society. And Yuna had no reason to expect anything different for humanity. The delegation reached the central chamber where hundreds of observers had gathered to witness the ceremony, representatives from dozens of species filling the tiered seating that rose in concentric circles around the ritual space. Yuna recognized some of them from her diplomatic work over the past 3 years since humanity had achieved faster than light travel and begun its journey into the wider galaxy. The Kethvari with their forearms folded in formal greeting. The serpentine Dashans coiled on their warming platforms, the massive Gorvaths standing like living mountains at the back where the ceiling rose high enough to accommodate them. All of them watched her with expressions she had learned to read as curiosity and mild interest. The same look she imagined humans might give to a new neighbor moving into the community. The head archivist waited at the center of the chamber, a being named Kethros, whose species had evolved for this singular purpose across millions of years. He stood taller than any human, his body wrapped in robes that seemed woven from solidified starlight, and his face held features that suggested great age and wisdom. With eyes that looked like windows into somewhere else entirely, 6 lesser archivists surrounded him in a perfect circle, their hands joined and their minds already beginning to link in preparation for the ritual. Yuna approached the center and bowed in the manner she had been taught, low and respectful, but not submissive, acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Without diminishing her own dignity, Kethros inclined his head in return and spoke in a voice that resonated through the chamber. Without any apparent effort, Ambassador Yuna Park of the human species, you stand before the archives to receive the gift of naming, the word that will define your people's place among the stars for all the ages to come. I stand ready to receive this gift on behalf of all humanity, Yuna replied, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt in her hands. The ritual began with a sound like distant singing, the archivists raising their voices in a harmony that seemed to vibrate through the crystal walls themselves. And Yuna felt something brush against her mind like fingers made of light. It was not painful or invasive, merely curious, as if someone was gently leafing through the pages of a book that contained everything humanity had ever been or done or dreamed. The observers watched in respectful silence as the singing continued, some of them closing their eyes in what appeared to be reverent appreciation of the ancient ceremony. Yuna kept her own eyes open, watching Kethros as his expression shifted through phases of concentration, interest, and what she interpreted as mild surprise. The surprise deepened, his brow furrowed in confusion, then concern, and then something else that Yuna could not immediately identify because she had never seen it on an alien face before. The singing faltered. One of the lesser archivists gasped and broke the circle, stumbling backward as if struck by an invisible force, and then another collapsed entirely, falling to the crystal floor with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent chamber. Kethros stood rigid, his eyes wide and fixed on something that existed beyond the physical world. And when he spoke the true name, his voice came out as barely more than a whisper, but everyone heard it. The word emerged in the old tongue first, a sound that seemed to carry weight and history and terrible meaning. And then the translation followed automatically through the chamber systems. The word rippled outward through the gathered observers like a wave of ice water, And Yuna watched in confusion as expressions transformed from curiosity to shock to something that looked very much like terror. A Leshan diplomat uncoiled so quickly that she knocked over her warming platform, her scales flushing with colors that Yuna knew indicated extreme distress. And she fled the chamber without any attempt at maintaining diplomatic composure. Others followed. The Kethvari rose as one and moved toward the exits with a speed that seemed impossible for beings of their size. And the Gorvath, who had seemed so steady and unmovable moments ago, pressed themselves against the walls as if trying to create distance from Yuna and her delegation within. Moments the chamber had emptied of nearly everyone except the humans, the fallen archivists, and Kethras himself, who still stood frozen at the center of the ritual space. Yuna turned in a slow circle, watching the last of the observers disappear through doorways that sealed behind them with sounds that suggested locks engaging. What happened? She demanded, her diplomatic training warring with genuine confusion and the first stirrings of fear. What was that word? What does it mean? Kethras finally moved, lowering his gaze to meet hers. And Yuna finally recognized the expression that had eluded her before. It was terror, pure and primal and absolute. The kind of fear that exists below rational thought. The fear of prey, recognizing a predator it cannot escape. The true name, Kethras said, his voice shaking in a way that seemed wrong, coming from a being of such obvious age and power, has not been spoken in 4 million years. I do not understand, Yuna said, stepping toward him and watching him step backward in response. What name? What did you call us? Kethras looked at her the way a small animal might look at a forest fire approaching its home, with the knowledge of inevitable destruction written in every line of his ancient face. We called your species by the only name that fits what we saw within you, he said. The same name that was given to only one other species in all of recorded history. He paused. And in that pause, Yuna felt the weight of something enormous pressing down on the moment. We named you the Inheritors, Kethras whispered. Those who remain after all others have fallen. Yuna stood alone in the empty chamber, surrounded by unconscious archivists and one terrified ancient being. And she understood with growing unease that humanity had just become the most feared species in the galaxy without ever knowing why.